Welcome back to the Westouge campaign. During January 1811, the French and Allied forces have manoeuvred after leaving their winter quarters. Matt tried to wrestle Stonehouse back from Colville, with Solomon encountering Steve en route Garlic. You can see the first Battle of Stonehouse in the link. The Allies won in both battles and allowed Scott and Dan to conduct a pincer movement to place Westouge under siege. After the battle en route Garlic, Solomon retreated to the hills above Westouge to reconstitute, with Steve following up and joining the siege lines. Scott has repositioned to support Dan and block the road back to Oakwell. In Stonehouse, Colville has managed to reconstitute and double time it back to the town, which was still under control of the Allied militia, in time to defend against Matt's second attempt on Stonehouse. This was repulsed with heavy casualties, and you can see that battle report at the link. The siege of Westouge was successful for the Allies, who managed to secure one of the gateways into the city and forced the French defenders to abandon it due to dwindling supplies. As the French left the city to the north, they left behind a number of agents who tried to create an insurrection by the population of Westouge. The embers of rebellion were extinguished by the British before they could take hold. The departing French fled via the fields and took up a defensive position to the east of the city. The French general, seeing what was in front of him, ordered Matt's brigade to force march to rejoin the main army, which allowed Colville to follow him, seizing the villages of Underamt and Luncorn en route. Colville peeled off to the left and positioned himself unknowingly to the French on the right of the Allied army, waiting for the opportunity to descend on the French flank. The Allies shook themselves out into a battle line. However, both commanders decided that defence was the best course of action. Unfortunately, the French Emperor had other ideas and ordered the French forward to defeat the Allied forces. The battle to the east of Westouge is being called Judgment Day by the troops that were involved. Taking place in the fields and woods, it was an ideal battlefield for both forces, with plenty of space to manoeuvre. Whilst the French had the advantage of the hills, their orders were to attack negated their value. The Allies were outnumbered throughout this battle, as the French Emperor had sent an extra brigade to support the attack. However, the Allies had won a series of skirmishes which allowed them to deploy their forces on blinds. Grand batteries were deployed by both sides, using the open terrain to their advantage. The French opened the battle by focusing their advance on both the left and right of the Allied lines, using the space available to manoeuvre their numerous attack columns. The Allies responded by sending a rifle unit to secure the temple and the farmhouse in the centre. Unfortunately, the Oxfordshire Light Infantry Battalion received the wrong orders and charged forward towards the Old Guard. The fighting was intense and lasted longer than expected. Whilst the 52nd had left the Allied lines with a gaping hole, they did succeed in delivering some damage to the Old Guard and disrupting the French advance. On the Allied right, after a series of orders going missing which held up their brigade, one of the French columns engaged the Cathadors in the woods and cleared them out, but they were unable to exploit their success due to be disordered and the continued firing of the Spanish Grand Battery. The French centre had much better success and managed to win the race to the farmhouse. However, one of their columns suffered dreadfully from British artillery fire. Once the French had reorganised themselves on their right, after the charge of the 52nd, they continued to advance onto Steve's brigade, putting pressure on the rifles and attempting to swing around the right of the temple. This was stalled by a charge of British horse, forcing one of the French units into a square. The French left advanced forward towards the Portuguese and Spanish. However, they had a shock to see Colville's cavalry brigade appear behind them. The French knew he was around but didn't know where or when he would arrive. The horse artillery quickly got to work and unloaded canister directly into the French line unit, forced into square by the approaching cavalry. With the appearance of Colville, the French cavalry brigade, which had been held in reserve, was deployed, with a unit of lancers heading towards the French right to support the Old Guard, and the horse artillery covering the centre, and the rest heading towards the newly arrived Colville. With the British reserves committed, the French launched their own reserve brigade into the fight, this appearing on the right of the French lines, and conducted a slow passage of lines of Solomon's brigade, which had taken the brunt of the fighting so far. In the centre, the British rifles continued to exchange fire with the French columns, keeping it pinned in place. With the Allied left looking increasingly weak, Scott's brigade advanced in the centre to get into the fight, with the Northampton Battalion charging the French in the house, supported by the King's German Legion, and the Royal Irish advancing still on their blind to their left. Colville's King's German Legion cavalry on the Allied right charged the French infantry in the rear, with the British Royal Dragoons attacking the French counterparts. Fire from the French square had disrupted the 2nd King's German Legions, which prevented them from joining the charge. This fighting was intense and managed to push the French cavalry back, but did not rout the infantry. The French square managed to withstand another punishing round of canister fire. Over on the French right, it continued to push on, and its splitted advance to flow round the temple. One column charged the British Grand Battery. Whilst it took some serious fire on their way in, it was not enough to stop it completely. They overran the guns, but could not exploit the situation due to losses incurred. On the other side of the temple, the French charged the British line unit, which countercharged and fought them to a standstill, seeing the French off after fierce fighting. In the centre, Northamptons were charged in the flank by a French column, which was countercharged by the King's German Legion. The fighting was fierce and confused, with the Northamptons being defeated before the French column also routed. The French occupying the house had left its safety to try and engage the Royal Irish, but quite couldn't make it, and were charged in the rear by the King's German Legion once they had dealt with the column. The cavalry action over on the Allied right continued, with the King's German Legion dragoons winning against the infantry, charging into the flank of a French column, scattering it, and continuing the charge into a French square, which had decided to lie down to protect itself from cannon fire. Unfortunately, this meant that it was no longer in a square formation and charged by the victorious Germans. The British Royal Dragoons' success against the French Dragoons continued and forced them to retire again. However, the Dragoons were charged in their flanks by the Mamelukes of the Imperial Guard, which caused the British to rout after a few bouts of fighting. The Mamelukes were then charged by the remaining King's German Legion, who managed to hold their own out against the Germans. The Royal Horse Artillery cantered forward to fire into the column by the barn, supported by the Portuguese line and Spanish artillery. However, this fire was not enough to dislodge the stubborn French. This proved to be the last action of the battle. As the light started to fade, the two armies started to disengage. The French had one brigade broken, two more near breaking point. The Allies suffered a few less casualties, with only Steve's brigade near breaking point. However, the French had failed to seize any of the objectives from the Allies, and after a consultation with their superiors, they quit the field and conceded the region of Westouge to the Allied cause. With this battle, it brings the Westouge campaign of the North Oxfordshire Wargaming Group to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it over the last year. We certainly have. If you'd like to see more videos or campaigns in the future, please like and subscribe to the channel. Please leave any comments down below. This has been The Fighting Sailor, and I will see you in the next one.